Good afternoon, Elaine. This is it. For those of you who don't know, Elane Zimmerman is Executive Director of the Connecticut Commission on Children. As Executive Director of the Connecticut Commission on Children, Ms. Zimmerman reviews children's policy and reports to the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of the state government with recommendations for children's legislation. Elaine?
Well, good afternoon, Senator LeBeau, Representative Morris, members of the committee. It's an honor to be here. I'm going to address this issue from a slightly different angle. Being the director of the Commission on Children, I'm going to focus on the impact on the child and ways to bring the father back to the child. There are ways, there are successful ways. I'd like to give some models and to show how dads do return, who have left, and also very similar to what Peter has spoken to so eloquently, I will speak to how we might save taxpayer dollars, but in some other ways than what he addressed. We've had some research that has been relatively new in relation to children that shows both the importance of making sure that dads are involved in children's lives and the importance for child development. The most recent and important research is brain research that has told us that unlike the body, which takes 20 years to mature to 95% of its full size, the brain develops to 90% of its capacity in the first 5 years. And at birth, children's brains have almost all the brain cells and neurons they need. Now, why am I talking science about the brain? What's so interesting is that when the child is born, and we didn't know this till we began doing different sort of scientific scans, when the child's born, the brain is actually still forming, and it's really forming in those first 3 years. And if you almost imagine a tree, the brain develops based on interaction and connection and warmth and love. Branches grow based on what the child experiences. If the child does not experience very much, the branches don't grow. And the horror is that if you imagine the brain as a tree, branches fall off, and they do not grow back. So what the child gets in those first 3 years, in connection, in exposure, in love, in nurturance, really affects the lifelong development of the brain. This is new. We did not know this. We also didn't know that the brain is influenced by stressors. So if a child is exposed to violence, that negatively affects the brain. If it's one time, okay. If it's many times, it's actually almost tattooed on the brain. And the child actually develops a resonance towards something. So it's not just momentary exposure, it actually has an imprint that's lifelong. So good influences the brain well, bad influences the brain poorly, and it actually in the first 3 years develops and influences the growth of the brain for the long haul. The other piece of research that we've known but that continues to grow, and there continues to be more examples of, is that a child needs connection. And if a child doesn't have connection in those early years, the child's ego development, personality, is unplugged. And it is the unplugged child that's a little bit of a nomad, lost, has much less of a conscience, isn't connected, doesn't think about otherness, can't give the same way, and doesn't have what we would call values or conscience. So connection truly matters for a little munchkin. It matters for lifelong development and personality. And that's where the dad is so important. Now, what is so interesting is that there's been a study that came out from Child Trends, and I'll get you that study, that, and it's not in your packet right now, but I'll follow up with it, that followed children from birth longitudinally and found that the father had a different impact on the child's cognitive development in those early years than the mother did. So I don't just want to talk today about the impact of the missing dad. I want to share with you what the research tells us about the particular nuance and the importance of dad versus mom and how important dad is. So what the Child Trends study found was that father involvement notably impacted a little baby's cognition. And in particular, there was a greater impact on cognition for baby boys and interestingly, for children with disabilities. So I will get you that report, but once again, it speaks to the importance of, in particular, the dad. As Peter referenced, it is indeed the case, and the literature shows, that the father missing from a child shows some problems. And we've seen that when a dad is engaged with a child, whether at home or not, when the dad is engaged with the child, there's reduced contact with juvenile justice, there's a delay in initial sexual activity, and there's reduced teen pregnancy. There's less reliance on aggressive conflict resolution. This is the child. Children do better in school when the dad is engaged than when just the mom's engaged. Higher grade completion and income. Math competence in girls. I think that's so interesting. So girls improve verbal strength in both boys and girls, which means literacy. Both boys and girls end up with greater problem-solving competence and stress tolerance, which we see so much that's missing in a lot of our kids today. The tolerance, the capacity to tolerate stress. Greater empathy, moral sensitivity, and reduced gender stereotyping when the dad is around. Dads are different from moms in their parenting, and they bring different gifts to the child. So one of the things that dads bring is that they focus on activation and stimulation. Moms tend to focus on soothing. Dads focus on regulation. They have a regulating style that's predictable, which is very important for children. The mother's behavior is less predictable. Dads focus on preparation for place in the world. Mothers tend to talk about relationships. Dads focus on real-world issues. Mothers, once again, on relational. Dads teach children frustration tolerance. You know, you can just hear the dad saying, try it again, and the mother goes and hugs when the child falls off the bicycle. The dads try it again. So the dads teach frustration tolerance, which is very important in a complicated world. The mothers teach facilitation. So it's a different set of skills. They complement one another. Dads do gatekeeping, mothers respect. And so the dad has a very, very important role. There's also an impact on the dad when the dad is not involved in the child's life and when the dad is. When a dad is involved in a child's life, his health is better. So if we're just focusing on the impact of connection to the child for the dad, he's healthier, there's less accidental death, there's less suicide, there's less job change, there's less aggression, and there's less impulsivity. So both for the child and for the father, it's important to promote, regardless from my vantage point of marriage, the connection of the dad and the child. The risks for fatherhood when the dad is not connected to the child, there's more guilt, there's more isolation. The more the father feels disconnected, there's exclusion from the child's life, there's much more stress for the dad. We know that, and you all know I've raised this because we spend a lot of time working with fathers in prison, the literature shows us that the children who have dads in prison have a 7 times greater chance themselves of going to prison than their peers who do not have a parent in prison. Let me translate that into regular terms for those watching. You know, the likelihood of a child going to prison is so high if their father is in prison. On the other hand, the mediating effect is if the child visits the father and if they have a good relationship, the odds of the child going to prison decrease and the odds of the father going back to prison decrease. We, the Commission on Children, we have a program in the prisons in the state where we teach dads to read to their children, to pick good books. We give the books to the children. One child wrote and her father and said, you know, this was the most beautiful present you ever gave me. They connect through words. These fathers tend to have a better history of not returning to jail when they connect to their children. The literature tells us, and I think most of us know this, that in a family where you have both a mother and a father, there's also more income for that child. So that when you just have a mother, there's less money. So inherent in that mathematical fact, children who live with just one parent, particularly the mother, because mothers make less wages than men do. So they have their wage equity we have not quite reached yet, and so females make less money. So if it's just the mother, there's less money coming in. There's a definite increase in poverty if the father is not contributing economically to the family. We talk about this, but most people don't know what it means if a child's in poverty, so I just want to share that so you've got it from the lens of the child. Children in poverty are more likely to have the following problems: low birth weight, infectious disease, asthma, poorer cognitive development, in many cases stunted growth, child obesity, missed immunizations, hunger, food insecurity, which we will of course see more of this year, and lead poisoning. And children in poverty are 3 times more likely to die during childhood than children who are not poor. Once again, this is a critical reason that we need fathers engaged with the children both emotionally and financially. The vantage point that I offer is less about family structure than about family functioning. The family that functions well provides income for the child, safety, nourishment, values, learning, and spirituality. And so I think the question is, what helps a family function, and how do we help the child, and how do we get dads back in the story? There's a wonderful African tale of a child who just keeps saying, "Where is my father? Where is my father? Where is my father?" The father's missing. And the child doesn't stop. And ultimately what happens is, out from the earth comes the father, and bones become a person, and then the person develops a spirit, and the father's back. I think it is deeply about our expectation and our commitment to honor dads, and to make sure that the heart of the dad is connected with the heart of the child. That's what that story, to me, is about. We need to treat men more as assets than we have. Our culture and a great many of our laws began to treat men as insignificant except as breadwinners. And then when they didn't provide the money, we put them in jail. So we need to help those men who actually want to come back, to come back. And many lack actually the resources and skills to come back. And we need to help those dads come back. We have nationally $100 billion owed to children in child support. But frankly, 70% of the dads have no ability to pay. You can't have a conversation about dads and children without talking about the economy and employment. And we haven't talked about that yet. So marriage may be important, and I certainly think it is. But I think of equal importance is to talk about how we make sure that dads have jobs, the skills to work, and the skills to contribute. Because if they do not, women don't want to marry them. They are not even attractive. There are many fathers who want to do the right thing, but they lack the resources. 95% of these dads are not married. They want to help their children. The value of children is the highest value we have in our society, but we need to help dads who want to elevate that responsibility and commitment to their children to be able to do so. Now, it's my privilege to be speaking today. It's utterly accidental, but I looked to see when John Martinez died, State Representative John Martinez. It was October 12th. It's really just a month from now, 2002. And I was driving and I heard a gentleman on the radio speaking from Georgia who spoke about getting dads back to their children. And what they did in Georgia was they tried to get the good dads who wanted to reconnect to their children to figure out how they could get them back. And they said, okay, here's the deal. We're going to let you not have to pay all your back pay and child support. We're not going to put you in jail. But you're going to have to make a commitment to reconnect to your children and to begin child support as soon as you get a job. We're going to help you figure out what your skill set is, what you need, how to get that job. We're going to get you that job. You commit at that point to reconnecting to your child 100%. If you stop, we go back to the old plan. And you know what? Thousands of men came out of the woodwork. And they came out of the woodwork, every age, every culture, sobbing because they wanted to connect to their children, but they owed so much money, they had no skill set, there was no way for them to reconnect. In other words, unintentionally, we had forced these dads underground, and then it became a way of being. So when this happened, just personally, I'll share with you, I was driving, I heard this gentleman talk, I didn't believe it, I called him, I actually literally stopped my car and called down and flew down to Georgia and met with the gentleman who started this in Georgia at the Carter Institute, and followed the data, and then brought him here. And Representative Martinez met him, and we began to try to implement what Georgia did. Now, what they did was very interesting. They took, it was at the beginning of welfare reform when this happened, but they partnered with the Department of Labor, Department of Corrections, all the community colleges, and health. And they looked at the cost of incarceration, the cost of enforcement of child support, and health care costs, because they thought about, well, if the dad gets a job and gets health coverage, then that helps the family. And that cost $8,000 in Georgia. And then they created an intensive model where you looked at the dad wherever he was of what he needed to become employable. And that cost $2,500. So they saw that though they were developing something new, and some people like bulk, that it actually was going to save a significant amount of money, approximately $5,500 per effort, per dad. And in 10 years, they brought in $20 million in child support that had not been collected. New York is doing this same model now, statewide. I had opportunity yesterday to speak to the person who started this in Georgia, and he's agreed to come up here and talk with you if you would like, and I've raised the money for that if you choose to have him come. There's a similar model which you have a copy of in your packet, but I'll speak it and then you can look at it, called the Fathering Court. And the Fathering Court is in Kansas City, Missouri. And in Kansas City, what they did was they saw how many dads were in arrearage in child support, and they understood the problem. They understood what this was doing, and they understood how many dads were disappearing. And what they did was they did something very similar. They created a court-assigned case manager to say, okay, if you're not connecting to your child and not connecting and not paying your child support to the mother because you don't have a skill set, we're going to do the following. We're going to have you go to fathering court. You have to take, they have a 12-week fathering class called Quenching the Father Thirst, which talks about parenting. They have a graduation. They stop the prosecution. And the data shows that dads went from 43% contact with their kids to essentially 70%. Emotional reconnection, it's back to the science I was talking about earlier. The dads went from 74% to 100% being with their children, 68 to 100% of talking to the mother about the children. Whether they reconnected and married that mother or not, they reconnected to the mother because they understood the importance for the child of communicating with the mother for the child. So if you go to the next page, what they found was, once again, it was just like Georgia. They compared the incarceration costs, all the costs of child support collections, and lo and behold, the Kansas City folks saved $7 million, $7,056,000. So there are other ways to begin to look at the cost of fatherlessness on a society. And because I'm with the Commission on Children, obviously my focus is going to be on the child and the dad, less about family structure. But what we do know is that this actually worked. Once again, in my conversation with the folks in Kansas City, they had judges prosecutors, a curriculum, and they also have said that they're glad to come up here and speak to you as a team. And I took the liberty, with no presumption, I've raised the money if you want them to come. So you have that model. So they're willing and they have a team. We know that when the dad reconnects to the child, and the dad doesn't have to be underground, those men who perhaps erred, they made a mistake, they did something irresponsible. But do we say that if someone does something irresponsible, that we then don't help them come back, if they want to, acquire the skills, and get them what they need in job training, etc., so they can reconnect to the child? There are funding streams that I would be glad to discuss at some point with you that could pay for this. I'm not unaware that we are diving into a recession, or it looks like we are, but the good news is that there's the possibility of various funding streams to help pay for this. And the Poverty and Prevention Council came up with 67 recommendations in our state to look at how to reduce child poverty by 50% within 10 years. And we then brought in the best experts in the country on poverty reduction, some Republicans, some Democrats, and we said, we will only go with what you have consensus on to reduce child poverty. And they took the recommendations, and they were really thorough and quite elegant in their intellectual work with one another, and very committed to reducing child poverty, to the point that they, one was in London on a call, making sure that they talked every week. But you have the report on child poverty reduction, I believe, in your packet. But one of the core recommendations they stressed was the importance of getting the father back. Now, you can get the father back through marriage, or you can get the father back through employment, forgiveness. And I'm not suggesting that if there's a person who has done irreparable damage, has no real interest, and is just not a good person, that's not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about the dad who perhaps erred, who's deeply depressed because he's lost, wants to come back and reconnect his children. And I would suggest that these models show us that there are ways to do that. There are models in the country. John Martinez began this here, and frankly, and in full disclosure, this model was tested in the Department of Social Services. The Department of Social Services stopped at the point of the case management because they thought it was too expensive. I would argue that we didn't take this or push this to scale, that actually the cost of helping the dad is much less than the cost of jail and the cost of support oversight, child support oversight. That we can do this, and that we need to, because we have too many children who are unplugged, who are faltering in school, and who are missing the particular attributes that I described to you that are their gender-based. They are what dads bring in addition to whatever each personal dad brings individually. But there's certain things that these kids aren't getting, and they need to get it. So I would recommend, in honor of Representative Martinez, 2002, it's been 6 years, that we finish what he began and look at how to help dads reconnect so we don't have as many unplugged children in our state or as many lost fathers. Thank you.
Thank you, Elane. Particularly appreciate reference to Representative Martinez and what he began. I think that this committee is actually trying to follow in John's footsteps, and appreciate you're doing the same thing. I also very much appreciate your testimony today. I have to say, it's new and it's bright. It gives me hope that there are things that can be done. And it's interesting listening to you and Peter both. But I think that there are ideas that we can work with here that are not partisan, that really look towards trying to both help the dad and the child. And much of what you said I just totally agree with in terms of when you help the child, child, that there's an intrinsic connection there that goes back to perhaps basic biology as you society with brain development. I was trying to listen to you, and I don't have too many questions, but let me ask one question. You talked about treating men as assets and trying to bring them back. And these programs you're talking about, I would love to follow up on this and to try to get more information and to have some people come in front of this committee and to speak in front of this committee and talk about what we can do. Let me ask just one question. What percentage of dads, in a sense, have we discovered really want to get back with their kids? Who are the biological father or the dad?
Yeah, it's
do
a great.
we have an idea from Georgia or from Kansas?
It's a great question. You know, I'll get the precise figures from them. I want to tell you anecdotally from conversations that it's at least half, but I'll get you the data.
Well, if that would ever work, to get half the dads back, and we talked earlier about changing the culture, if we could move half the dads who are not with their kids and taking care of their kids and providing support and love for their kids and protection for their kids, we get half those dads back, that would change the culture immediately. It would provide models for others who may say, well, that's the way to go. I mean, we tend to look at each other and what's everybody doing, end up dressing the same way, cutting our hair the same way, men and women.
And I can't tell you the number of women I've been with who will say, I don't want to go near him because he's not employable. So we can talk about dads being bad or deadbeat, but you have to talk about economics, you have to talk about jobs, and also you have to talk about race bias if you're going to look at this. So I'm with you, and we do have models that are working in the country, and it would be wonderful if we could look at them and see if we can bring them, build them better than we began with John Martinez, because it didn't get completed.
One other question, a technical question. I have a variety of things. I have things on fathering courts. I have some stuff, a lot of stuff from the NCSL. Do you actually have prepared remarks that you can share with us?
I just had notes, but I'd be glad to write them up for you. I'd be glad to do that. And I believe that what's in your packet, you have a PowerPoint that was sent to me by the folks in Kansas City with their outcome data, so they are able to show how much they saved and also what they put into their case management in this fatherhood forum. You also have from the National Conference of State Legislators, and by the way, I come to tell you that they're glad to help. I was with them yesterday. They're glad to help in any way. They're glad to provide any staffing that you need. They will do any research that you need on this. So you've got their recommendations and their findings. And then I also put in the Poverty and Prevention Council report because I wanted you to see that committee using these national experts. And it was so interesting because some were very liberal and some were exceptionally conservative, and they all agreed on the importance of the fatherhood piece as a key element. So I wanted you to have that report because your work is parallel in another entity that's thinking that this is so important that Secretary Scenario leads. But I will get you the information on Georgia's model and the outcome data there. I'll be glad to write up my comments.
Great. Thank you so much. Gotcha.
Thank you. Elane, you're always fantastic. You know how to connect all the dots. You've done a wonderful job doing that today. I certainly appreciate how you began by emphasizing the importance of the guided dads and what they bring to the development of a child. Hearing the terms that you put in today, I think is going to be important for every legislator that watches on BPN and our lessons following this discussion. So thank you very much. Also, I'll tell you that this PowerPoint that you give us from Peter Stokes it is phenomenal. Looking at page 2, where it has some information about what policymakers should know. I mean, in fact, that most states do not have a statewide strategy regarding low-income fathers. And I made a connection today for us with the work that you're doing with the Poverty Prevention Council. You just said so many important things. I'm just really commenting today because you given us a wealth of information to study, to take a look at. I believe my co-chair, Senator Lobo, has already agreed to make mention to the fact that we do want to follow up with you on your offer, whether it's to have Mr. Spokes or someone else come to this committee. We will be talking to you in a week, and we'll come taking on all of your offers with NCSL and wherever else can make this meaningful for us. And I particularly like the following part, because Representative Green isn't here today. However, it's been one of his primary concerns, because here at Hartford, one of the things we hear more than anything is about the dads who've gone underground. And that was a lot of our discussion when we first began this. In fact, like Mark and Nick, when we first started talking about this a year ago casually, he was working with the African American Affairs Commission. He talked to Representative Faith McMahon and I, and we began to understand that we actually had individuals who were incarcerated for failure to make payments. And we know it costs us like $41,600 a year to do that. And their payments are a lot less. It just didn't make sense. So you provided an argument here today that I think requires a lot more scrutiny than something for us to really look at in practices. I'm going to turn over to Representative Clemens. I'm sure he has some questions. Because I don't have questions, but I want to just follow up with you. You've been a fantastic resource. You always have when it comes to the food stamp program. There's so many things. You do a phenomenal job, Elane, and I'm so pleased we had you here today. Representative Clemens, if we get some questions.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, Ms. Zimmerman. I don't have questions per se, because you've given us, as Representative Morris and Senator LeBeau said, a wealth of information to digest. It's more or less some statements to concur with what your testimony was presented here this afternoon. I don't even know where to start. It's so detailed. But you mentioned earlier that a young person, by the time they're 3 or 5 years old, they more or less develop some characteristics of who he or she is going to be. And you mentioned that when it comes with the dad's involvement, it provides activation, stimulation, frustration, tolerance, and some regulations. And also you did say what the mother brings, some nurturing and those aspects in there. And I like that they're both equally important.
Absolutely.
Having the mother and the father in that structure. But relating to bringing fathers back that have been incarcerated, and if a child has already started to develop these characteristics or attributes, do you think that it is possible with the father being re-engaged with that child, say after a period of time due to incarceration, could they recapture those areas in a child that, say, was missing for an extended period of time?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's never too late for connection. Connection heals. It heals the heart, it heals the soul. It's never too late. And children, when I'm with children who have dads in prison, it's breathtakingly upsetting, frankly. They can tell you, they can describe the moment, what it was like when their father was down, being handcuffed, police on top of him. These are moments that are with them every day, the way someone else might remember a fire. So having a dad back and that reconnection, presuming that the dad has healed and wants to contribute optimally, if the dad, for example, is a gang member, it's not a good idea for a reconnection, because that information and those skills will be what will be passed on unless the dad's decided to change. But I'm not talking about that kind of dad. If it's a dad who did his time, who wants to repair, who wants to come back, we really should let him. Re-entry is key, and re-entry will only succeed both with economic skills and connection and purpose. Otherwise, people will go back to jail. So it's not too late, both for the dad and for the child, though it is most momentous for the child to have those early years really matter.
Okay. Thank you. That's very encouraging. And in looking at the packet from the father in court, and this is a wealth of information. I'm going to take a real concerted look at this. But in looking at the under the box with the proven solution, and here in Kansas City, it states that these men were coming back to the family, and they were incarcerated, I guess, because of child support, neglected child support.
Right, that's right.
Do you have any idea here in Connecticut how many people are incarcerated, specifically men, for default in child support?
I don't. I'll get you that information.
Okay, thank you. And I do agree with Senator LeBeau and Representative Morris that in honoring Representative Martinez to his legacy, if we can follow up with this initiative, I think it would be really important, and it would go a long way in terms of helping to solve this important situation that we have, a crisis. And also, I was just thinking, maybe it was thought of with Representative Martinez and yourself and some other advocates, but you triggered my thought process in terms of, when you mentioned economics and job. We as a legislature last year, we were very vocal in talking about putting money towards the front end, and when we were talking about juvenile justice reform. Mm-hmm. And you added more credence to a lot of us in terms of our stance and position on that. Just food for thought. If, say, a young person, teenager, even a young adult, became pregnant and using the faith-based our churches and civic community groups, and with the help of that young person who is pregnant, do you think maybe we could, say, ask her, the person, the male that has been with you, or that is the father of this unborn child, could we, say, find out if is he employed, is he working, and then maybe try to be proactive into looking at measures and way of providing, say, employment for these young couples.
Yeah, it's a great,
and to prevent, the back end, having to work.
Right. It's a great question.
I don't know if I articulated it correctly.
Yeah,
no,
I think you did. Dads are the most connected at the point of birth. So you can establish paternity at no better time than when a baby is born. And if you were in a hospital, often, married or not, the dad is there. So if we had a way to meet the dad And if dads actually believed that they weren't going to be treated in such a way that they had to flee, but actually might be helped, then I think anything is possible. The truth is, Representative Clemens, we have moved dads underground, and if they are not in jail because they didn't pay child support, in many instances they think that they have to work in non-traditional ways and in some illegal ways if they owe money. So, and they're going to owe money unless they're employable. So the point, the touch point, the place where dads are, they're at that birth bed. The young dad is too. So if we came up with a way to reach the dad there and help. But the truth is, right now, men do not believe that they're going to get helped. They believe they're going to get locked up, and then it's worse because of race. So we'd have to really turn that around.
You may have more to say on that, Representative Clemens, and I'm not having you yield to that. You may have more. But just to add to this piece of discussion, in the wings with us today, we have Karen Foley-Shane from Nurturing Families Network, who has a member from, I forget the university, but Dr. Black, who is currently doing a study for us, which is the Nurturing Families Network, where he has a program where they're working with new moms in a number of communities throughout the state. And Karen, which came to us and had a discussion, that they're dads. Their social workers are going on, they're there, but they are not being serviced. So they've got a phenomenal program where they're to do the kind of evaluation and assessment, give the outcomes for moms. So they're doing that model for us now, and we can actually have a report back to us by late December.
See, that's wonderful, because in some way we're talking about the importance of the nuclear family. And we're talking about culture, and maybe culture causing the demise of marriage. On the other hand, there's something we're doing culturally that's also facilitating some dads disappearing. And we're not nurturing them. Am I saying that we are the cause? No. But I think we may be complicit in some of the remedy.
Yeah.
Or the lack of a remedy.
Right. Well, certainly. I would think the fact that, I'm grateful that Karen recognized that and others recognize that we've been meeting the needs of moms and neglecting the dads, and then we need to change that. And in fact, quite frankly, our investment that we've had in moms in this regard probably has been less than sufficient, less than adequate. But we need to change that paradigm and certainly focus on the dads. It's interesting, in the presentation that you gave us also from Mr. Stokes, one of the recommendations that was in there did have to do with, it's almost actually on page 2, where it cited that most low-income fathers are in committed relationships with the mother of their children at the time their child is born.
Right.
And at birth, many low-income mothers and fathers indicate their interest in marrying, and the response for what policymakers can do, or the recommendation, was that we use voluntary paternity establishments, Representative Clemens, to connect low-income fathers and mothers with parenting and child development skill building activities.
Right. I think what I did was I packaged those poorly. You have the information from Missouri, and then the sheets that have a sort of blue line, that's the National Conference of State Legislators information, and they did a national study state by state, and they're saying what you're saying, Representative Morris, that that's where to find them. So you have 2 documents that look like they're all from the Missouri study, but one is actually NCSL.
Certainly, well, I believe Elane has helped us to move at least a month ahead.
I did so. Let me just also comment on what you just said about the state government perhaps contributing to the problem, not causing it, but contributing to it. That is one of the charges of this committee, was to look at what we are doing or not doing. And are we exacerbating the problem? Are we mitigating it? What can we do to make things better as opposed to make things worse? And so your points are right on.
And if I can give one last comment, I'm not sure if it's a comment or question, let me just kind of put it out there. When you talked earlier about that both parents have more income in the home, and that doesn't, when you don't have that, it makes it, there's an increase in poverty. in your Poverty Prevention Council meetings that you're having, have you ever come up with a number? I know you've got to reduce poverty by 50% by 2014, but is there ever tracking of a number of what poverty is costing to the state of Connecticut?
Yes, we do have that. And we also have a figure nationally on what it's costing. And we did a literal study for the Poverty and Prevention Council on the costs of poverty. And I want to see if it's in the report that you have here. Child poverty costs $11,800 per child in lost future productivity per year. The Connecticut labor force is projected to lose as much as $1.1 billion in future productive capacity for every year that the current number of Connecticut children live in poverty. 1.1 billion.
Okay, so chicken or egg scenario that we talked about
Right.
in earlier meetings. Certainly, if the dads aren't there, it's going to cause poverty. And all right, so thank you very much, Elane, for fantastic information.
If you hold your seat,
Yes.
we're going to ask Peter Wolfgang to come back up. I think we spoke. I hope I know it's getting late.
It's fine.
What we'd like both of you to do is to make a comment about each other's testimony.